Doing great.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Glad to be here. Daniel, I am a huge fan of your work. I honestly think it's criminally underrated, some of the very best out there about parapolitics. You've been at it for decades, and I'm glad that you're finally starting to get a bit more recognition for what you've done.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm way too old to be an overnight success, that's for sure. Um, we could spend an hour, and I could tell you a long story of the difficulties that get placed in one's path when one, goes off the tries to tell the truth and gets good at it. I will accept that compliment. I studied this stuff, and I've gotten pretty good at it. Um, but there's a deflating part to that too. Is there was a certain point when I could look at a plane's registration from the FAA and like know what was going on. And I called a friend of mine out in Newport Beach. A friend of mine, he's a friend of mine, an older gentleman who is retired now from probably NSA, but it could have been the CIA as well. And I said, dude, how come this stuff is so easy for me to figure out? I said, I'm pretty smart, but I know I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And he looked at me and he said, it's because they don't bother to hide it. Which, if you think about it, it's a pretty horrifying thing to say. They don't bother to hide it.
No, they don't, because they think that they can feel like that they can get away with it. The world order thinks that no one's paying attention, that no one cares, and they can get away with all the crime and debauchery and the arms trafficking and wars and child trafficking and drug running and anything that they can get away with, they think they can. And so by revelation of the method, they'll put it out there. Sometimes you'll get some good reporting even from the Fourth Estate, even from the news media every now and then, even if it's by design, or there might be some good people who are writing for newspapers who are out there. It's few and far between of how it used to be. But yeah, I mean, they put it all out there for the open for us to try to find, and some people, when they get a little bit too close to the sun, like Danny Casolaro or Gary Caradori, they get taken out, they get snuffed out. Or if they can't do that, they sue you in oblivion, or threatening you, or whatever they possibly can do for people who are trying to get the truth out there.
Well, that's happened to me. Danny Casarola was the last guy that I'm aware of that had, that's one of the best things about America. Okay, there are a few things good about America still, and one of them is that they don't kill you. They don't kill you here. They don't have to. If they can slow you down.
Yes.
That's all they need to do. I mean, after 9/11, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions too, because I want to know how you got interested in this, because I view my job at this point as telling you everything I know, so that there's somebody that knows once I sail off into the sunset. When did you become who you are?
Well, I woke up about 2008 when I heard. Now, my father was a conspiracy theorist growing up, and I didn't believe him. I went on with my grandparents' belief. My grandfather was a neoconservative, so I was raised listening to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, and so I had bought into that. I had bought into being a conservative and a neocon. And my father was more liberal. But he was a conspiracy theorist. I remember watching X-Files with him, and he telling me that all of it is true and everything. And then he passed away when I was 18. And so I remember listening. I used to listen to Coast AM with him growing up. And I remember turning it on one day, and Alex Jones was on, and he was talking about how 9/11 was an inside job. And I never heard that before, but the stuff that he was saying, I was like, wow, I guess I've never really heard this, so maybe, I'll try to look into it to try to debunk it, right? Well, I couldn't. And then I started thinking, maybe I've been lied to all these years, and maybe my father was right. So I started researching, and I throughout the years, and I kept my research to myself and everything, and I have gone through different stages and learned more things. I sadly Still thought Alex Jones was our guy up until about 2016, and I voted for Trump. That was stupid on my part. 2014, John would have said never trust any of them. They're all, in part of the plan some way, shape, or form. But I got conned in because I still listen to Alex Jones on occasion, and everybody went for Trump, and I wasn't listening to people who weren't going for Trump at the time, and so but then a friend of mine sent me the work of Josh Reeves about the Council for National Policy during the election, and I kind of just brushed it off to the side. I was like, nah, it can't be true. And then I started seeing the same people that Trump was putting in his cabinet when he was, supposedly draining the swamp, but instead was filling the swamp. They were all CNP members. And I was like, I've seen these names before. And that's when I started realizing it. Oh my God, I've been fooled. And then I started... I started going on conspiracy podcasts. I mainly do health. That's my main job. I run a website called Fix Your Gut. I've had gut issues all my life. My middle son, Abel, had health issues, and I use my knowledge to help him. So I usually go on conspiracy shows mainly to talk about health. But I said, well, I've done all this, research and done all this. So why don't I start, my own YouTube channel? That's what I end up doing.
You've already learned. The essential thing you need to learn that most people never learn. Okay, I had to learn it. I had to learn to accept the fact that I could be successfully lied to.
Yes.
And until I did that, I sat across from a guy who's connected with something pretty big over in Miami, and I was looking at this guy, and I'm thinking, dude, you're like way smarter than I am. You could successfully lie to me right now, and I wouldn't know it. So we can all be lied to, and we all have to admit that to ourselves.
Yes.
So that we can amend our course as we learn, right? Okay. Big lesson.
Oh, very much. As true investigative researchers and journalists, we have to admit when we're wrong, because that's what the people in the truth industrial complex don't do, is they don't admit that they're wrong when they're presented with new evidence that changes their paradigm of the way they're looking. Alex Jones to this day, I mean, he's part of the Council for National Policy, so of course he's going to go with Trump. But that's beyond the point, is he doesn't admit that he's wrong, or he doubles and triples down. It's like 9/11. 9/11 to him, Mossad used to have a little bit of involvement with 9/11, but it was, Bush and Cheney and the Anglo interests. Now it's none of that. It's just the Saudi Arabian hijackers and the official narrative, because David Horowitz, CNP from the Freedom Center, told him so. And that's what Alex Jones is going with now, is the official narrative for 9/11. How far he has fallen, or maybe he just got his orders and that's what he does, but that's what he's going with now.
Well, I could talk all night to you about 9/11. But let me say this first, okay? If you've been around in America for a while, and you paid close attention to what's going on, you can't help but be sad a lot of the time, because you realize that no matter what you do, that's all you can do. Back after 9/11, when I was here in Venice, I knew stuff nobody in the whole damn world did. Okay, I knew amazing stuff, but I couldn't. I used to tell people that I could discover George W. Bush alone in a room with an elephant doing something inappropriate and have pictures and not be able to break the story. So that's when, that's when you go, oh, gee, despite my best efforts. And I am seeing something right now that reminds me of something that was going on before 9/11. And so this is like, we're discussing disinformation today.
Yes.
I am. So you can ask me anything you want. Back in the day, okay, when you were just boys, I got interested in politics again for the first time in 35 years. See, the best thing about being me is I'm 68 years old and I'm a baby boomer, and I was around when things were going on, okay? In fact, I just saw a documentary on Netflix called about Woodstock, about the making of it, just the other night. I went, damn, I'm glad I'm a boomer. But then I went to sleep for 30 years. I mean, I did what I could to protest against Vietnam War. That seemed to me to be, an existential question. But I wasn't, a Lyndon LaRouche type character or an establishment Democrat. I never was. So I went to sleep as best I could. And I enjoyed myself. I was a TV producer. I mean, I was hip, slick, and cool back when being hip, slick, and cool was still okay. And then Gary Webb happened. And that poor guy, I could sit here and get tears in my eyes just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because he was on it. He was, onto the main deal, or a main deal there, and they didn't even bother to refute what he said so much as just run him out of town. Okay.
Yeah.
And then he lost his he lost his ability to make a living doing what he'd been trained to do. And then he lost his wife, and he lost his house and his family. And on the night before he died, he was about ready to give up the last thing he had that he really cared about, which was his motorcycle. They were coming to repossess it. And I thought, oh, damn,
Yeah.
how sad is that? I mean, Gary Webb, if you can hear me, and I'd like to think, wouldn't you like to think that it wasn't just that he died, thinking what an utter failure I am, So, I got upset.
Yeah.
I thought, what can I do? And I was producing a little business show, a lot of travel. I was enjoying it. And I thought, what I'm going to do is a pilot for a new show called Conspiracy, a half hour. And if you remember any of those old shows like Kid Search Up,
Yes.
all that old stuff, every episode, half-hour episode, had 3 stories in it. And the middle story was like, semi-believable, at least semi-believable. And so I went out to shoot a middle story about Barry Seal down in Louisiana. It was going to be a 12-minute clip, on a half-hour pilot. And it ended up being a 2-hour documentary because my mouth just, my jaw just dropped as soon as I got off a plane in New Orleans, and even before. And I was lucky. I kept my eyes open, but I had chosen Barry Seal, and unbeknownst to me, he could have been anybody, but he turned out to be the main line. He turned out to be the real deal. I'll tell you a brief. As I was driving to Louisiana, okay, to poke around into Barry Seal's life, the first time, I think it was the first time, I stopped in Santa Fe to have iced tea with 2 wonderful writers who had written, to that date, the best book about Barry Seal and Clinton and Mina, and it was called Partners in Power, by Dr. Roger Morris and Sally Dent, a wonderful writer who did a terrific book about Kentucky. And Dr. Roger Morris was on Richard Nixon's National Security Council. He was no schmuck, an eminent historian. And we're sitting there sipping iced tea, and he looks at me and he says, what have you heard about Barry Seal flying a getaway plane out of Dallas? And I said, gee, Dr. Morris, I didn't know there was a getaway plane out of Dallas. And he didn't say much more about it, and I kind of think he regretted having brought it up later. But it's not the kind of thing you can forget if someone has asked you that question. So in Louisiana, I had to probably spend an extra 6-8 months poking into Barry Seal's life before he became famous as America's first famous drug smuggler, and discovered that very likely the question had a positive response. And even more interesting, what I discovered in New Orleans was what the meaning of an open secret is. I can remember having dinner in an Italian restaurant in New Orleans with a woman who had just been robbed of a seat on the city council because of faulty voting machines. And she brought me to dinner because I had done by that time a documentary about elections election software called The Big Fix.
Yeah.
She bought me dinner with her. This is the guy that was like staking her in her political career, and he kind of looked like a very, very nice, well-dressed Italian male in New Orleans. And when I mentioned the getaway plane to him, or I had heard that, he exchanged looks with this other guy at the table. And in that one look, I saw everything I ever needed to know, because they both knew what I was talking about. Yeah. It was an open secret in certain circles. There you go. There you go. It's not that people don't talk, they do. It's just that oftentimes what they say doesn't get out there. About the Kennedy assassination. While I was poking around in LBRY SEAL, I discovered that Barry had a money laundering entity called Trinity Energy that he had used. And in my search for what had happened to Trinity Energy, I met a woman down there named Lena Rimor, who had run, along with her husband, a steakhouse chain under the name of Trinity Energy, okay? Which is kind of odd. And it turned out that her husband, who was a fairly violent character, worked for Carlos Marcello, and had gone on a shrimp boat down in 1978 to South America for a year and come back a permanently wealthy man. Today he owns the biggest steakhouse in Texas. And his wife, who actually talked to me because she was, you know who talks to you? Who talks to you is like pissed off ex-wives and business partners that you've done dirty. Okay.
Yes.
They'll talk. And so she talked, and boy did I mean, what an education I got. I'm sorry to be rambling here, but there are a few stories. Her aunt was famous in the Kennedy assassination. Her aunt, who she called Aunt Jada, was Jada Conforto, a famous stripper who was the headliner at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club the week of the Kennedy assassination. True story. And on the morning of the Kennedy assassination, she hit a pedestrian because she was in such a hurry to get out of town at 10:30 in the morning that she couldn't bother to stop. Okay?
That's crazy.
It's crazy, but it's crazy true.
Yeah.
And you know what? There are two reporters, credible reporters in Dallas, who have known this story for 50 years. Jada was seeing one of them, and they're famous writers. One is Bud Schrake, and Dan Jenkins, and I got the Gary Cartwright. They were famous sports writers, and they knew this story because they knew Jada. He had been dating Jada, so
yeah.
He knew that that's what had happened. And you'll never hear, and you will never hear that story told at any JFK assassination conference, sadly, because people that go, people that write about JFK don't want to admit to anything happened after JFK died. So they still keep going over the same ground. God bless them. There's a certain part of there's a certain part of me that will never get over that hurt, and they just keep going back to it because they're going to finally figure it out. Well, it was figured out 45 years ago. So, moving on.
No, thank you for telling us that story. It's stuff like that definitely needs to get out there. And you're right. When it comes to research on the Kennedy assassination, since we've been so far removed from it, that most people are just focusing in and only on the assassination in and of itself. And since many people have passed away that would be eyewitnesses to the assassin or around it or the circle or whatever, dealing with the assassination of itself, it's very hard to really track down anybody or talk with anyone, or it's even getting harder by the day passes.
Yeah, you know what? When I was in, it's a while now since I was in Louisiana researching Bury the Boys, and it's probably damn near 20 years. 18, 19, 20. When I was down there, there were still plenty of people around who had been with Barry Seal and Lee Harvey Oswald in the Civil Air Patrol in Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I met a few of them. I heard amazing things about David Barry's ability to hypnotize.
Well, I mean, you interviewed quite a few people for Burying the Boys. I mean, me researching the Finders case is a little bit more further. It's around 1987, but even still trying to get hold of people associated with that case. Some people have passed away. Like Tony Mashburn, who was a Tallahassee Police Department detective. So the farther you get away from an occurrence, the harder it is to actually do investigative journalism, to talk to new leads and flush it out and stuff like that. And like you said, most people, even when it comes to the Finders, most people before Derek Bros or before me, most people just told the same stuff. The Gunderson report, Ramon J. Martinez's report. No one was coming up with anything. They weren't interviewing anybody. It was just a rehash of everything that's been done previously beforehand.
Have you talked to my buddy out in Oregon, my publisher buddy, Chris Milligan?
No.
Hey, you should. Chris is a wonderful guy. Lacks a certain PR strategy. Chris has published 2 books. He's a wonderful publisher. He's like the Lawrence Ferlinghetti of the Willamette Valley. He's in Eugene. It's true. That's what I call him. But he's published 2 books that deal with everything we've been talking about since Jeffrey Epstein. The Franklin cover-up.
Yes.
And another one, DC Madam.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Chris is an old hippie. Okay, and he's not a fast talking New Yorker, but what he should have done is get those guys in every damn TV show in America right after this stuff hit. He did do some of it. I'm not saying he didn't, but that's your area, as they say in Hollywood. So you got to talk to him. He might have some leads for you.
Okay. George, how did you get involved in researching and everything? How did you wake up to being deceived by the world order?
Yeah, well, it was definitely a much different story than with you, John, but we ended up in pretty much the same place ultimately. I basically just started out as a normal, liberal or left-wing person following politics, and I really started to care about it in 2016 when the Democratic primary between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton was going on. And I was a supporter of Bernie Sanders, and I just saw as the election went on, the deck seemed completely stacked in favor of Clinton. Day after day there was always some new irregularity coming out, and I was wondering why the election was going in such a way when it looked like Bernie Sanders had far more popular support than everyone was making it out to be. And eventually I came across, when the Arizona primary hit, and there were all these reports of people being disenfranchised, people waiting in long lines, being unable to vote, people's names being knocked off the voter registration lists, I finally came to the realization that there was actually something horribly wrong with the way that we run elections in this country. And, going back, I sort of did a back tour through history at that point and realized it wasn't just this one election, that we have been suffering from this issue for years. 2000, 2004 were all being shifted in favor of Bush. There was extensive evidence in that regard. So many manipulated elections ever since we first installed computerized vote counting systems. And so I came to realize that we had a systemic problem in our voting process, and so I became the head researcher of the Coalition Against Voter Disenfranchisement and Election Fraud, CAPDEF, the organization I still work on now. And it was really just initially I was just devouring as much information as I could about voting machine vendors and the people behind running these elections. But eventually I sort of came to the real, I started wondering, who are these people? Who's actually behind these systems? Is there some kind of embedded corruption that enables all of this to stay in place? And I started looking into the history of these vendors and realizing that, yeah, there was. A lot of these contractors had ties to drug trafficking, organized crime, and even cases like the Franklin scandal with election systems and software. So my research into
in Omaha, see,
yeah, exactly.
Like you, I was a business reporter, back in the day, and so when I got interested in what they were doing with elections, all I did, the piece of the puzzle I chose, was to track back the people who were running the companies and the way they sold to each other and move forward. And the biggest one, the one you're talking about, the one in Omaha, ES&S, tracks back to a guy named Howard Esping from Dallas, who was with the NSA. True story. The other company, second largest company, and the one that caused the Florida vote snafu, Sequoia Pacific, was at the time of the 2000 election owned by Ireland's richest multimillionaire, a guy by the name of Dr. Michael Smurfit.
Smurfit, yeah.
Who hung out at Geneva racetracks with Zurich currency speculators. True story. He owned the company, and why he owned the company is an interesting story. The election companies tended to be owned at that point by Rockefeller interests, okay? And he was a bagman for St. Joe's Paint. So no, St. Joe's Box Company, which at one point owned an election company. And in New Jersey, you go to New Jersey, that's where the mechanics hang out. The mechanics are kind of like sleazy semi-mob guys in central New Jersey who know how to twist things. The woman I had dinner with that I was just telling you about it at the restaurant in New Orleans, who lost. Spunky lass. In Louisiana, you are allowed, if you are a candidate, 3 days after the election, 3 days after the election, to examine the voting machines, where they have them. They put them all back in a big warehouse. She went, and she brought a cameraman with her. What a smart lady. She brought a cameraman with her. And she's testing these machines because you're allowed to just, and she would vote for herself, and the vote would register for her opponent who had beaten her, a guy by the name of Jambaluka. Okay? So she'd hit the button for, she's voting for Nancy, but, comes up as Jambaluka 3, 4, 5 times in a row. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me finish. Let me just finish this out. I knew how hinky the 2016 Democratic primary was when Hillary Clinton announced that she'd won California by 3 million votes. Okay? If she won by half a dozen, it would have been a lot. And I can tell you why. Sanders was surging. He won 4 primaries in a row. In the week before the California primary, the state of California registered 200 or 300 new voters. And then the result of the election is she's won by 3 million votes. The reason she won by 3 million votes is because she wanted to tell Senator Sanders, I can beat you by how many votes do you want me to beat you by?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. California absolutely was one of the dirtiest primaries that I saw in that race. I mean, there was, during the so-called audits, the election officials down in San Diego were flagrantly violating the law and not even recounting most of the ballots. You saw exit polls that matched perfectly with every single race except for the one between Sanders and Clinton. You tons of provisional ballots just going totally uncounted. There was so much wrong with that election and with the rest of the elections too.
Somebody did a graph that I saw recently of the mail-in ballots that were counted by hand versus the mail-in ballots that were counted by machine. There's no way that discrepancy could have been anything but massive fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for mechanics in New Jersey, I mean, it's a flick of a switch, and yet apparently, the only thing that could be done is paper ballots, but probably it would take revolution to do it because they don't want that done.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the same scam was run in the 2018 elections that were held down there in Florida. I think the Council for National Policy ran the same Blackwell scheme that was probably run in some of the states, I would assume, during the 2016 election, like Pennsylvania. That was run way back in 2004 in Ohio. I'm pretty sure they were just running the same vote machine scam that they had been running through each election, just because the tallies of those votes looked so off at the time in each of those cases, that whoever the world order wants to win, they're gonna put them in office. That's just sadly how it is, and you see it time and time again. But again, when we really think about between John Kerry and George W. Bush, both Skull and Bones members, whoever wins, we lose. And it's the same with Clinton and Trump. I mean, they're both crooks, and I've seen you on social media, Daniel, mention that you're not necessarily for the Democrats, because I mean they're just as corrupt as the Republican. I mean, they're all corrupt. I mean and people get on to you because of that.
The choice that was presented to the American people in the 2016 election was a crime.
Yes.
We were forced to choose between the two most unattractive candidates for president in the history of the entire United States: Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton is not someone that I would support in any way, shape, or I would vote for her against Donald Trump because he is a true madman, and I think he's dangerous to the country. But I have nothing good to say about Hillary Clinton or God. The regular Democratic Party has made a living off of being 2% better than the National Republican Party.
Yeah,
and they expect us to be happy with that.
Because they're both the same party, in my opinion. They're both doing by what the world order wants them to do. I mean, they may have a different coat of paint on each side and stuff like that, but Obama was, white phosphoring with the Saudi Arabians, the Yemenis people, just like Trump is. The same machines marching forward.
Obama had perfect pitch. Okay? What does the President of the United States do? Mostly, he appears on television 3-4 nights a week.
Yep.
Okay? And and he was good for that. We could talk otherwise, but he was good for that. Let's talk disinformation here for a minute.
Okay.
Because you guys are well aware, I know you are, of how it worked in the 2016 campaign. I mean, and here we are, and here's what's interesting. They are not using the same disinformation tactics that they used in 2016. We'd all be happy if they did. Oh, I remember that. They're not doing that. There are a bunch, someone told me a long time ago, all our friends are not our friends. And there are a bunch of, what do you call them, web outlets today. And one I'm thinking of in particular that is just creepy. Just creepy. I don't know how else to say it. Okay, you guys know who Mint Press News is?
Yes, I do. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I do. Yes, I
Well,
do.
Yes.
you know, and this, okay, this makes you lose heart in American journalism a little bit, because you know who was on to Mint Press in Minneapolis was local journalists there and national journalist organizations, the Columbia Journalism, yada yada. They all did stories about it. But nobody bothered. Nobody bothered to like see if we're talking about a company whose managing editor is a 27-year-old petite woman with a wearing a hijab. Okay, but the power in the company is the man who funds it, who is a Jordanian with a name I would have a difficult time pronouncing, so I'm not going to do it. Who spent 5 years in the middle '80s learning, in a theological cemetery. Boy, there's a Freudian slip. In a theological seminary in Cohn, Iran, the home of that noted humanitarian Ayatollah Khomeini.
Yeah.
Who, and he comes to Minneapolis now, and his spiel is that he's created thousands of jobs in Minnesota. He's had a string of successful companies, and he's giving back to the community. Okay, he does everything but call himself a philanthropist, because anybody knows that when they call themselves a philanthropist, it's like waving a red flag, going crook, 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 crook. So he doesn't do that, but he touts his successful companies. And the other day when I was finally forced to take a look at it, it's bogus. They're bogus. I looked at 3 or 4. He's got like 7 or 8. I looked at 3 or 4, and all four were bankrupt. All 4 were defunct. And yet they were spending big bucks on this Mint Press News. They were hiring people away from Gannett, the national chain Gannett newspapers.
Right.
They were hiring people away from Gannett and paying them $10,000 more a year than Gannett was. And I think that's one of the original things that made people suspicious of them, was because they were offering not dozens. They were offering journalism jobs.
Yeah.
When there weren't any to be had anywhere else in the country. Bizarre.
And I mean, Mint Press News also, from what I've seen, they tend to favor Russia. They tend to not look at Russia's involvement within the world order, and seem to strictly focus on Israel. Not to say that there are issues with Zionism and with Israel and too, but I'm saying they strictly focus on that, but excuse Russia and the Russian oligarchs completely.
What I'm here to tell you is that Mint Press News is an op. Not being connected inside intelligence, they can tell you who's running it. But if you were to guess the government of Iran, you might not be far wrong. But it could be somebody else. But it is not what it pretends to be. The guy that owns it is not who he pretends to be. And here's the thing, okay? Their ace reporter is not who she pretends to be. Her name is Whitney Webb.
Yeah, I'm well aware of. I'm well aware of Whitney Webb's work. Yeah.
You can't open a fake left-wing news site today without finding a story of hers there. And she's a decent researcher. I will give her that. But when people were all head up about the story she was writing about Jeffrey Epstein,
Mm-hmm.
I decided, well, I'm going to have to read this. And they were, it was a 4-part series. It must have been 15,000 words altogether. And there was nothing. I mean, there was nothing in it that hadn't been discovered by somebody else. Okay? And the mistakes she made were actually, in part, kind of comical. I mean, she was so anxious to pin everything on Mossad.
Mm-hmm.
that she wrote that Adnan Khashoggi, a man who I know quite a few things about, a man whose father was the personal physician to the king of Saudi Arabia for 30 years, a man who spent his adult lifetime as a CIA fixer. Adnan Khashoggi, she wrote, was a member of Mossad.
Gee, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Actually, John and I both noticed the same thing when we first saw Whitney Webb's work, that she was basically trying to dishonestly make it look like Israel was the sole mover or the prime mover behind pretty much everything that went on with Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, Mossad played a role, but there were numerous CIA, FBI, Saudi intelligence players, and it seems like that was all pushed aside to favor the narrative that she was wanting. And even acting like the Promise software scandal, for example, was just for the benefit of Mossad, when the CIA and the Department of Justice under Ed Meese were huge players in that. So yeah, John and I pretty much picked up on the same thing about Whitney Webb's reporting, and we were critical of it for exactly the reason that you say.
Or leaving out the Hollywood connections, or leaving out the Russian connections, and the Russian oligarchs and the Jewish oligarchs and the mountain Jewish oligarchs are all in Russia, leaving all of them out and primarily focusing on the Mossad. Not to say the Mossad did not have connections through Robert Maxwell and Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, and connections into the whole Epstein scandal. I'm not saying that at all, but she primarily only focused on that and left every part out of the nexus completely out of it, period. And that's what the problem was, and I see it more and more with Mint Press News, is it's primarily focusing on Israel, not saying that Israel in and of itself isn't part of the power structure, it is, but ignoring Russia, ignoring the United States Central Intelligence Agency and Anglo interests, ignoring the Jesuit part of it, ignoring everything else, but just primarily focusing on this one part. And usually when people do that, that's a problem.
Let me now mansplain to you what the purpose of this operation is, as I see it, because I've seen it before. Do you guys remember Mike Ruppert?
Yeah, I do.
Mike Ruppert, who I knew pretty well, basically decent guy, with a troubled past. He was a CIA-connected police officer in Los Angeles, who came out, to his credit, in 1996, in conjunction with Maxine Waters, looking into what Gary Webb had been investigating, and saying what he knew about the CIA smuggling drugs. It was his moment in the sun. God bless him for it. He's dead now, right? Killed himself. A couple of years later, I'm down in Louisiana finding out amazing stuff about Barry Seal, and he's pumping in with stuff that's pretty interesting, but not as interesting. And then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden he has his CIA connections are giving him the hot skinny about what happened at 9/11. At that point, I'm down in Venice, Florida, talking to people who knew Muhammad Atta, talking to people who knew that the owner of the flight school they went to was running heroin, talking to people who knew that the airport in Venice, Florida had been used by the CIA for 50 years. But Mike Ruppert's getting all the press, and one guy, a liberal journalist named David Cohn, actually went down and exposed Ruppert. And someone says, "Why don't you do that with Hopsicker?" He didn't say anything, but he didn't do it either. So I called a friend of mine, because I have one or two, and who was, with it. Hey, what is this guy doing? What is this? And he explained. He says, "It's a backfire." You know what a backfire is? You have a fire coming up the hill towards a bunch of houses. You set a fire to meet the fire.
Yes.
And put it out. And that's what a backfire is. And that's what our friends at Mint Press are. There will be nothing to come of anything there. Well, I don't even want to say that. What I want to say is we have all got to be very careful about who we let give us information today.
Yes.
And ask the questions, where are they coming from? Where are they coming from? And in case of men press, it's coming from a former acolyte of that noted humanitarian Ayatollah Khomeini. Go figure. and actually, there's something interesting about Miss Whitney Webb too. Did you read about her? I mean, her bio is like 2 sentences long, and I actually, because I was trying to figure out like who is this woman, so I listened to her being interviewed for an hour on one of those, on another one of these fake Real Clear News type deals, and I learned a little bit about her, enough to like be able to dig into who she was, because her official bio stops at, well, I've been a journalist for 10 years, and I've been living for most of those last years as an American expatriate in Chile. Okay? And sure enough, she kind of looks like she could be living in Chile, like up in the hills somewhere. But that's not the half of it. Okay, what's the name of the town that we have seen over and over again as being right in the middle of all this like intrigue swirling around the elections, swirling around 9/11? It's Sarasota. It's the town just to the north of where I am here in Venice. Sarasota is where the Saudi family, 48 hours before 9/11, left dinner on the table and scrambled to get out of town.
Yeah.
Okay? Saudi Arabia, not Saudi Arabia. Sarasota is where massive financial fraud has taken place, connected to, I wish it could be connected directly to Donald Trump, but it's connected to Steve Bannon. Yeah. Okay? Steve Bannon and an acolyte of his chief lieutenant in Sarasota, a guy by the name of Andy Badalato, who's been credibly accused of rape like on 3-4 occasions, busted out easily a dozen small cap companies. I mean, there was a story in the paper a week or so ago about somebody looking to charge Donald Trump with stock fraud after he gets out of office because of the micro cap stocks he was involved in. You guys have any idea how much money there is in that kind of fraud? Adnan Khashoggi, along with Deutsche Bank, stole $300 million from investors and actually he bankrupted a stock exchange. He was a smart guy, Khashoggi was. He stole $300 million. The SEC made Deutsche Bank give back $279 million of it. Adnan Khashoggi never paid a penny. Never paid a penny. And wandered off. I mean, so the biggest slush fund in the world is obviously drug money. But it would appear that playing games with the system, financially, is like an equally good way to make a lot of money fast. I don't know what they do with the money. I mean, I often wonder, what do they do with all the money? Okay, apparently, it's clear if you study history at all that the CIA made a calculation, and they probably were right, in about 1962 or 63, that in order to rule the world, which I think they wanted to do, they would have to control the world's drug traffic.
Yeah.
And that very likely is what the Vietnam War was all about, because the CIA moved into Laos and began exporting opium, which they turned into heroin. I met a guy. Doing what I do, I meet guys that I wouldn't meet otherwise because I'm like a leftist, hippie peacenik. And I met a guy who was special ops, special forces. Not just special forces, but special ops, special forces. And, and I asked him one time, I said, what do you have to do to like qualify for an outfit like that? He said he wasn't sure, but it helped that he had been arrested 37 times for stealing cars by the time he was 16.
Jeez. I mean, I guess that is the untold truth, that the government doesn't really want to say, that you have to be a crook to succeed in intelligence.
And to finish it out, he was in Laos in 64, 65, 66. He was running an A base in the hills. And of course I had to ask, what is an A base? And like learn what an A base was. And it was a place where a small unit, 3, 4, half dozen special ops guys would interface with the local tribes that supported us, Montagnards, I think they were called, and buy all the heroin, buy all the opium that they were growing in the hills. And he said then once a month they would put all the opium in a huge pile and they would light it on fire. And then he said usually the day after that they would run around real quick to get downwind because there wasn't a lot to do.
Yeah.
In the hills of Laos, right? And then he said, the order came down, burn no more opium. Store for removal to a more secure location. And that order coincided with the CIA's Theodore Shackley and Oliver North, Lieutenant Oliver North, coming into the theater of operations in 1965.
Wow.
I'm talking too much, aren't I?
No, let me ask you a question. Since you mentioned Oliver North, I got a question for you, Daniel. Alex Jones has gone on record now saying that he was completely wrong about the Rex 84 plan for internment camps, and that it was because the globalists were trying to destabilize Latin America because they were trying to push for a Nicaraguan civil war between the Sandinistas and the Contras. And they were going to flood the American borders with illegal immigrants from Central America, and that's what the Rex 84 camps were. And that he bought into the to the liberal propaganda for all these years, and that's why he believed it. And that Ronald Reagan was a good man, and Oliver North was a good man, and they didn't do anything wrong, and everything. So, to that, what would you have to say to that bit of disinformation that Alex Jones is trying to push and completely say that the CIA had nothing to do with drug trafficking, that Iran Contra never existed? I mean, he is walking that narrative now more than ever.
You know, Alex Jones, you know, I met the guy once. He is, what's that guy's, he's Rush Limbaugh on YouTube, okay? He makes a living off of expending a certain amount of anger that he can call to mind at any time he wants. You know, but that's not what life is all about, guys, okay? It isn't about sitting around opining that, well, you know, the Jesuits got in with the Unitarians and they've been running drugs through, you know, and they're planning to do, no. Here's what I know, okay? Nobody on this planet wants to think of himself or herself as a bad guy. People will twist themselves into all kinds of shapes in order to avoid having to identify as evil, okay? To me, okay? So when you say, well, they're bringing people on the border to do, you know, baloney, okay?
So you would still say that Oliver North with the Rex 84, it was to, they planned to, if they were going to,
who knows what Rex 84 is and who cares, okay? Oliver North was running an operation without congressional approval.
Yes.
Okay, that had been voted down by the U.S., the duly elected Congress of the United States of America, one of the three co-equal branches of government, and he was subverting the Constitution by stealing money from the sales of guns to the Contras to fund the Contra War. Okay, you know, and selling. He was selling arms to Iran, for God's sake. Okay,
yeah.
Iran, our enemies. Iran had just blown up 283 Marines in Lebanon, and Oliver North is along with Robert McFarland is taking cakes to the Ayatollah. Okay, now what their geopolitical reasons were for that, you could ask them. Okay, I'm sure they don't think of themselves as evil. You know, Oliver North doesn't think of himself as an evil. He had his reasons, he would tell you, but he was running tons of cocaine. I mean, at the very time America was in the midst of a cocaine epidemic, he was making money doing it.
Did he try to set up the Sandinistas? Because you wrote about that in Barry and the Boys, that they appeared that they were trying, to set up the Sandinistas, some sort of false flag with radio equipment, and everything like that. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
Well, sure. I mean, here's what happens. Okay, you get busted for running drugs. You've got like a ton and a half of cocaine in the back of your Chevy Suburban, and what are you going to do? You're going to flip, and you're going to say, well, who do you guys want? And who did the American government want in the middle 80s? They wanted the Sandinistas. I mean, who did they want in the 90s? They wanted Castro. Castro was running drugs, but he wasn't the primary drug trafficker in the Caribbean by any means at all. Okay? Everybody was doing it. Okay? But we went after Castro because that was geopolitically in our interest, in somebody's interest to do. Okay, here is the essential fact of drug trafficking in one line, okay, that I have learned in my life. In every country in the world in which there is a significant market for illicit drugs, the people that control that illicit market are the same people that control the country. We don't have any problem when we read that the top general in Honduras has been busted for drug trafficking. We don't have any problem when we read that the president of Costa Rica had her plane used to run cocaine. That just seems normal. But apparently, we don't have any entrepreneurs in the United States that are willing to run drugs. We have no American drug lords. And that is the biggest lie that they have managed to put over on the American people.
Yeah.
Okay? 70% of the money that's spent on drugs, I mean, you look at the UN, they'll tell you this. 70% of the money that's spent on drugs stays in the country in which the drugs are sold. Okay? So that money's going through JP Morgan Chase and HBSC. In fact, in 2011, in the midst of the depression, I call it was not a recession, despite what they want to say. In the midst of that, the UN guy that was in charge of the United Nations International Office of Narcotics and Heroin Interdiction, or whatever they call it, came out and told the truth. He said that the only liquidity in Western banks at that moment was drug money, and that without the drug money running through Western banks, the whole thing might collapse. True story. So, that's too big to fail. That's too big to fail. So, what's the answer to that? There's only one answer. I mean, unless we want to see slush funds in the hands of people who can move those levers of power, that can buy anything they want, and everybody can be bought. Roy Cohn showed us that.
Yes.
We have to legalize drugs and accept, come what may. We have to legalize drugs because if you can't keep yourself from, well, first of all, keeping drugs illegal doesn't keep drugs off the street. By any means, all it does is make them more expensive. So we got to legalize drugs so that these pools of money go away, because this dark money, it kind of runs the world, don't you think? My new book is called Gangster Planet. Gangster Planet. That's what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Anything you got to try? Pop up here, George.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different directions we can go in, and I think you made a really salient point that, I mean, it's drug trafficking in particular and all these other illegal enterprises that basically create this sort of endemic criminality in our government that, can never go away until we, get rid of this as a market. And I mean, there are obviously so many different directions to take it. I do want to address some of the comments that people have been making in the chat. One person is interested in what you said about David Ferrie and his history as a hypnotist. I know that you've also written about Barry Seal and his interest in the occult and him being a pedophile, the role of the anti-Castro Cubans in New Orleans apparently doing stuff with runaways. I was wondering if you could talk about the stuff that you discovered with David Ferrie and pedophilia.
Well, David Ferrie was a pedophile. I mean, a fascinating individual despite that. I mean, just a bizarre guy. He had a condition called melopecia. His hair was like pasted on. It's a bizarre appearance. And he was the recruiter in New Orleans. There are certain places in the U.S. Okay. Now, most places you go to in the U.S., you go to Detroit, and it's a car company, car town. All right, you meet a lot of people that design cars, sell cars, work on factory lines. Cars are what they do. There are a few places in the United States where what they do is intelligence, where that's like the main deal. And Miami's one, and New Orleans is another. I mean, I'm not saying that this is always the case and it's always been the case, but when David Ferrie was in New Orleans, he recruited Barry Seal. He recruited Lee Harvey Oswald. Barry Seal, at the age of 16, was a hotshot pilot. But at the age of 16, Barry Seal was flying weapons from National Guard armories in Texas all the way to the mountains of Cuba and delivering them to, get this, Fidel Castro. Because that was when the CIA was supporting Castro. I'd have never known that if I hadn't found out that Barry Seal was flying guns to him. And David Ferrie was as well. So New Orleans was a nexus for that. I mean, Clay Shaw, all those people, for God's sake. George DeMorishow. I mean, these are people who make their living buying and selling information, to sovereign governments around the world. That's their job. Does that answer your question? Or was that what you asked?
Yeah, I mean, David Ferrie and all these other people, the whole milieu in New Orleans was crazy. And I know that, the JFK assassination people touch on it a bit, but I think that, your work is kind of conspicuous in its absence from what they do. And there were all these bizarre guys.
Here's a David Ferrie story that was told to me by someone who was there. I met some Civil Air Patrol students who had been in the Civil Air Patrol with both David Ferrie, Barry Seal, and Lee Harvey Oswald. And one of them, this one guy, told me a story of how they were marching out on the tarmac on a runway in Slidell, Louisiana, which is not too far from the camp where some of the Kennedy assassination shooters came from. Military drill, da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
And one guy was carrying what they call a guidon, which is like what you use to cradle a big flag. Okay, it slipped and slashed through his wrist, part of his wrist. And the guy's bleeding out. I mean, he is actually just, everybody's standing around in shock watching this guy, like, in serious difficulty because he's bleeding. And David Ferrie walked over to him with a hand out like this, had the guy do that or do the same thing, and he said, "You will stop bleeding." And the guy did. Now, the Civil Air Patrol guy that told me this story told me it was apparent to him that you couldn't just do that off the street.
Yeah.
That the guy who was bleeding had previously obviously been under hypnosis with David Ferrie, and he was able to reach into it. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple guys with books out. You should. Oswald's girlfriend, Judith Baker. I think that's
right.
My buddy Chris has published her book. There's a woman whose story has a quality of verisimilitude. I mean, who's gonna? I found Muhammad Atta's girlfriend. Who wants to cop to being Muhammad Atta, having been Muhammad Atta? It wasn't like she was looking to be found. She ran away 1,000 miles away, and she buried herself as deep as she could. It took me a year to find her. I mean, who wants to be Lee Harvey? Lee Harvey out. Her story had this ring of truth. And the other guy, Ed Haslam, who has written about David Ferrie, proves basically Dr. Mary's monkey. Okay, 2 books now. Ed Haslam, Haslam, has proved that what David Ferrie was doing, bizarrely enough, he was associated with Alvin Oshler, the major medical guy down there, and they were trying to weaponize cancer.
Yeah.
He was testing, not for vaccines, but he was testing for ways to give people cancer. And that's the true damn story, I swear to God. I mean, it doesn't sound bizarre. It sounds bizarre to me, but that's what he was doing. So obviously there's a lot going on down there, and we'll never know the whole truth of it. But that's an area of the country in which things like that happen. Famous Southern lawman I met, been on the wrong side of every issue since the 50s. Okay, he owned a plantation in Mississippi. I mean, this is one of the original Beauregards. In fact, his great-grandfather had been in charge of Fort Sumter. No, the one in Baltimore Harbor, the one they wrote the Star Spangled Banner about. And he had a great Southern accent, and he was amused that I expressed shock at some corruption that was going on in the South. And he looked at me and he said, things ain't always been just right down here.
Wow.
So there it is. I mean, we're doing the best we can.
Yeah.
But we find ourselves, a book. I'm a writer. I used to want to be a fiction writer, and so I read quality fiction. Guy wrote a book of short stories called "We Find Ourselves in Moontown," and kind of if you think about it, that's it. I mean, you wake up and you say, wow, man, gravity sure doesn't feel like it used to. It's our world. Well, we've had fun, haven't we? Are you guys talked out?
No.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it sort of seems like, we wake up, we see that the world around us is not what we thought it was, and we're some of the only people who really recognize it for that, and it's definitely a lonely battle trying to expose some of this and convince people otherwise. But, I mean, you've had some other interesting stories I remember. Like, if I recall correctly, you talked to another, when you were doing your 9/11 investigation in Venice, Florida, or around there, you talked to conservative Southern sheriff, and didn't he say something that shocked you, that he thought the CIA was involved in 9/11 because he tried busting all these operations and he just couldn't for decades?
He was a sad, and that's who takes stuff like this hardest. Okay, I interviewed a state trooper at the Mena airport who had watched drug trafficking in and out of Mena, Arkansas. A regular guy. They eventually gave him anthrax to get him off the case. But he was sort of heartbroken, because if you're a regular cop like he was, you bust the bad guys, you take their drugs, you burn the drugs, and and that wasn't what was going on. And so you're right. This guy you were talking about, who was that again? You were talking about?
Some Southern lawman, sheriff in Florida during your Venice investigation.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Bill Clements, Sheriff Bill Clements, was in charge of Charlotte County, just to the south of Venice, Sarasota County, and Mohammed Atta had been down there. They had gone actually to like 3 different flight schools in this area. Not the traditional story. And 2 days after 9/11, Sheriff Bill Clements announces a press conference. apparently without official permission, and announced that the local flight school had been on an email list of Muhammad Atta's. He had been added inadvertently after selling Muhammad Atta, I don't know, sunglasses. And and on this email list that Muhammad Atta would send out regularly were names of a number of people, apparently Arabs, but a number of people who worked for U.S. defense contractors.
Interesting.
Wow.
So they disabused him of the idea that he could just tell the truth at any time he wanted. Okay. But see, Charlotte County Airport is right next to Punta Gorda, and Punta Gorda is a whole city founded by three separate CIA agents, all of whom had spent their careers as China hands. And you find out that that's where the real dirty stuff goes on. Is guys that were with the Kuomintang. When General Claire Chennault, founder of the Flying Tigers, will go down in history as America's first drug trafficking general, because he would sell heroin to support his buddy Chiang Kai-shek. And if you talk to him, he would say, "I'm not a bad guy. I'm just doing this, so that these people have a chance at freedom." So I'm just letting you know that's the way that goes. Anyway, so Sheriff Clements down in Charlotte County, the poor guy, he knows he's going to get voted out of office next time he comes around. And here was what was going on, okay? There was a helicopter dealership at the airport in Charlotte County, through which the sheriff ran his own helicopter. And he told me one time that the Charlotte County Sheriff's Department owned a total of 23 functioning helicopters located around the world.
Wow. Oh my God.
And they had been stolen from the Charlotte County Sheriff's Department. 23 helicopters. And then someone else at the airport told me, nah, they weren't stolen. He said they were just released on their own recognizance. Open secret, again, an open secret, okay? Part of being a sheriff, in Charlotte County, or probably in Sarasota County too, is like going along to get along with when your betters and in federal agencies ask you for a favor. 23 helicopters. The first time I rode into the airport down there, it was a regular small airport. There was a huge silver DC-4 parked right just as you drove in, and up the side of the silver fuselage, from the bottom to the top, are animals, painted animals, giraffes, elephants, monkeys, all climbing into this ark. Okay, the most bizarre thing I ever saw, and it turned out that was owned by Frank Moss, who was a Iran Contra pilot.
Yeah.
Who has had his difficulties. This is the west coast of Florida. I found out. I mean, didn't come. My parents retired down here in the early '80s, and I spent my business career out in Los Angeles. I'd fly down to see them 3-4 nights in the wintertime just to hang out with my mom and dad, and never saw anything untoward at all. Like, I don't think I ever saw a cop. And when I came down here 3 months after 9/11 and started poking around, the first day I was here, I got pulled over twice. And I'm glad I did, because the second time I got pulled over, I said to the guy, "Do you think I ought to like stopping at the chief's office and and say hi?" And he allowed that'd be a good idea, and so I did. And the chief of police in Venice was a little too busy to talk with me at the moment, but he sent out his media guy, the lieutenant, and God bless this guy. He taught me more than I thought I'd ever know. I said, "Yeah, I'm pleading with the guy. Please, all I want to know, can you tell me, does Rudy Deckers, the guy that ran the flight school, one of the two magic, does Rudy Deckers have any local priors? Has he been arrested locally, basically?" okay?
Mm-hmm.
And this lieutenant looked so pained. He was a youngish guy, 35, 40 years old. He looked so pained. And he looked at me and he said, I'd love to tell you about Rudy Decker's priors, but he said the day after 9/11, the FBI rolled in and they took all our files, not copied all our files, took all our files, and they loaded them into 2 Ryder trucks right outside here, pointed right outside the window. And the 2 trucks then drove up to Sarasota Airport and drove right up the back of a C-130, which took off for Washington, D.C. with Jeb Bush aboard.
Wow.
Apparently Jeb Bush had some sort of fiduciary responsibility for national security here in Florida. And you know what? That was a fascinating story, and I reported it in Welcome to Terrorland. And then 5 years later, I found out like how the whole thing had gone down, because I talked to the pilot that had flown the plane, and he told me the records never made it to the FBI.
Really?
Feature that? Oh, yeah.
That seems about right. Seems about right. I don't think it ever reached there. I mean, why would it?
Anytime you find out something that you didn't know, something amazing that you find out has happened that you didn't know has happened, it's always worse than you could possibly.
Yeah.
It's never better.
Yeah.
Oh, that. No, you go, what? They did what? Because it's something you couldn't have conceived of in your own mind, if you thought about it all day long. What a world.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I guess it's a common refrain I've heard a lot, but it's kind of true. Whatever you think the government's doing is probably worse than you can actually imagine it. The paranoid mind is going to underestimate what's really going on.
So listen, I have a call to action for you 2 guys, okay? You interface with a whole other generation than I do, okay? Part of what I see now as my task is to help people who weren't there understand like what was, okay? Because, for example, all this QAnon nonsense, right? John Kennedy is on our side. JFK was on our side, right? No, he wasn't on your side, you schmuck. No way. I could tell you that because I know because I was there. I mean, there is no way. I guess the story is that Donald Trump has been anointed by God.
Yes.
To cleanse the Western world of miscreants.
Yes.
That is a story that is so funny. It's to die for. Okay, and yet, you know what? I saw it happen before, but not quite. Richard Nixon, when he was president, God, I hated him. When he was president, he didn't care if 49% of the American people knew that he was lying through his teeth.
Yeah.
As long as 51%, he could get over on 51%. That's all he cared about. How do you go through life like that? I don't know. I'd like to talk to you guys and to have you at least pass on as much as you can to your Confederates, so that some of this nasty disinformation gets put to bed, or yeah, right. I know.
I try. It's impossible.
Dude, listen. Whitney Webb, okay, has 50,000 followers on Twitter. I've got like 1,900, maybe 2,000 edging in, and I've been putting out stories like you couldn't believe for 20
Truth don't
years.
sell.
Here's the thing though. I wasn't a debutante and she was, okay? She's the only debutante that's ever been featured by Project Censored. And don't you think that says something more about Project Censored than you ever wanted to know?
Yeah, I mean, that's how the truth or industrial complex is. The people that are actually trying to get the truth out there, they're marginalized.
They control both sides.
Yes.
Okay, there's a movie I will urge on you, and then we'll bid adieu until the next time.
Okay.
Because I gotta wet my whistle. Preston Sturgis was a great American director in the 40s, a liberal American director. He made some wonderful movies about the Depression, and he made one called The Great McGinty, in which a reporter goes undercover as a hobo, okay, in order to like reveal the hardships that people were experiencing, in like 1935. And as part of his job as a hobo, he was around when they had the next election in town, and he was recruited to vote for the boss like 15 times. They paid him $2, and he did so good, was so diligent about voting, that the boss called him in after the election and said, "Son, I'm going to give you a job." And the guy was real happy. He says, "What am I going to do?" And he says, "You're going to be in charge of the Reform Party." And the guy goes, "Boss, I can't be in charge of the Reform Party. You're the other guy." And he says, "Son," he says, "hell, I'm all the parties."
Yeah.
Okay? I'm all the parties. And that seems to be the way it is. The Great McGinty, good book.
You're definitely right, Daniel. That's exactly how it is. Is the world order? It's running everything, and it's all the parties. And just like the next election, whoever the Democrats are end up told to pick, or whether there's a brokered convention or not, or whether or not Hillary Clinton somehow weasels her way back in through a brokered convention, we'll have to see. But again, it's going to be. Some people always make the lesser of two evils argument, and no matter who goes, it's still going to continue to march on, and that's what most people don't realize.
No, and here's something else most people don't realize: Democrats would rather lose than nominate Bernie Sanders and win.
Yeah.
Feature that he could have won in 2016, and I say that not only because I support him, but that's part of it. 2016 was a change election. People wanted change. And who did we get? We got Hillary. Okay? Hillary represented change, like in a very inefficient fashion. So she lost, and she was going to lose with or without Barry. Barry Sanders could have won because Barry Sanders was a Democratic populist. He was a left populist. I'm a left winger. I'm a leftist. I'm a proud leftist. I was never liberal, proud leftist. And he could have carried it because he had passion, and he inspired passion in the people that supported him. And at least it would have been, and here's the other thing I've always known, and I know this today, there's more of us than there are of them.
Yeah.
There always has been. We beat them once, and we could do it again if we have to. There's more of us than there are of them. So, with that encouraging word, I'll sign off.
All right, thank you.
You know how much energy it takes to talk? See, if you're a guy, okay, if you're a woman, and this is only because that's the end, there's probably no women left watching. If you're a woman, words come easily. You are fluent. It's a river. It's a river you step into. If you're a guy, God charges you a nickel a word.
Well, definitely thank you for having me on, Daniel. We hope to have you again. Everybody, definitely hope. I got the links in the chat directly. Purchase your books, purchase your DVDs, support your work. I can't stress it enough. I mean, Burying the Boys, Terrorland. I mean, the research that you've done, just the groundwork that you've poured your heart and soul into these books, everything into these books.
It's happening now. See, the point of getting good at what I get good at is I can see stuff faster now, all right? And I'm trying to stay abreast of current events as they happen currently, in order to give a heads up, like with the Men Press, for example, and there's others, but that's the one I'm on about this week. So thanks for checking in.
Thank you.
And this is fun. I got to use my new webcam.
Yes, we appreciate you having on. Hopefully we can have you on again. Have a good evening.
Cool. You guys take care, will you?
Bye.
Thanks, Daniel. Have a good night.
You too.
All right, that's it for this. That's it for this evening. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview. Daniel was great. I greatly appreciate Daniel's body of work. Burying the Boys, Terrorland, Gangster Planet. I mean, he's a storyteller. Daniel, excellent author. I mean, I can't praise his work enough, and the research that he has done trying to expose the world order. And I mean, George and Daniel are both left-leaning in their politics, and I'm more towards the right, but that doesn't mean that we can't find common ground. That doesn't mean we can't have discussions when it comes to the truth, that we can't, run down and investigate the world order in its fullest. Because, I mean, if you look at the stuff that Daniel covers on his website, Trump, Khashoggi, Deutsche Bank, and Chabaluevich, I mean, very, very true. Jerry Falwell, CNP member, Willie Hillard, and transnational organized crime, talking about Muhammad Atta and 9/11. I mean, this is true investigative journalism. Daniel interviews people, he runs down leads. He's old school, and that should be respected, because not many people in the current truther world today are doing that. George is, I am, Kevin, the Unknown Observer, Jimmy Jean, and Epic Journeyman from Into the Microcosm. If I'm forgetting anybody, Ed Opperman, William Ramsey. Forgetting anybody, I'm sorry. But the Antidote Boys. That's what this is. This is Josh Reeves. It's trying to get the truth instead of parroting. Because what most people are doing nowadays, they parrot what they hear without actually looking into it and doing the research themselves. Wednesday, I'm going to have a stream with esteemed researcher and friend of the show, Recluse. We're going to discuss the American Security Council and their role in the establishment of the hidden right, or what Josh Reeves has called the secret right, and Richard Mellon Scafey. So hope you guys enjoy that. And always, till next time, always read the documents.